Okay, welcome to Northeast Distribution Facebook Live training series. My name is Pat McGovern. I'm here today to show you how to clean a Piazzetta pellet stove. Welcome to everybody. Please, if you have any comments during this live training, please put them up there. We'll try to read them as soon as we can and get them answered for you. We're going to first start. This particular model happens to be a Piazzetta Saveva. This is an SC style model. They make this in two styles, a steel sided and a ceramic sided. This happens to be a ceramic side, clearly with no sides on it right now. The Saveva and the Sabrina are the bigger of the models, and the Monia and the Marcella are the smaller of the models. They also have a series called an SY series. It's a little bit different. Basically, the SC series, the heat comes out of the top area here, where in an SY, the biggest difference is the heat will come out of the bottom area. The bodies of the chassis are pretty much the same. A 963 SY is the same as this style here, the Sabrina and the Saveva. The 958 style is the same size as the Monia and the Marcella. So I first want to get into cleaning pellet stoves and why is it important. Most pellet stoves, the reason why they stop working is because they're dirty. There's something plugging something. Whether it's the ash down in the burn pot area or even in the venting throughout the thing. And 90% of the calls are because the stove is not clean. So we're going to go through the process of how to do that, and maybe if we have time, do a little bit of troubleshooting on the actual control board up here when we get done on the cleaning. So first of all, it's imperative that you actually let the stove shut down and cool off before you start doing this. A lot of people will try to just do it when it's still warm. If you have a good stainless steel ash vac similar to the one that we have here, which is a steel container, steel bucket, they work pretty well and they can pick up some hot ash. But a lot of homeowners don't have this style, and it is imperative that they should have a good ash vac. They use their home shop vacs. The problem with a shop vac is it has a paper filter, and if they suck up a hot ember, they could potentially start a fire in that shop vac. So it is important to make sure they have a proper ash vac with a steel container similar to the one that you see there. So let the stove cool down, then start your cleaning process. We're going to go through how to take all these parts out of the stove and where we should be cleaning for the Piazzetta. This little tool comes with them. So initially when you open this up, this potentially will be full of ash in this area here. This could have some ash coating on the walls and the sides, the baffle. So what you would start with is remove this. This is just a little flame guide. It just kind of helps to guide the flame away from the glass. Again, you're going to want to pull the burn pot out. And as you can see in the burn pot here, there's a number of holes internally. What can happen is, if this isn't cleaned out periodically, you'll have what they call a clinker, and it's just a hard chunk of ash that's built up in there. So you want to make sure you scrape that out, vacuum it out, make sure the holes are all nice and clean. This is where the airflow for the combustion, for the flame, comes through. So if these are plugged, you'll get a lazy flame, a dirty flame, and your stove will get really dirty. Also on the burn pot, you see there's a hole for the igniter. Just make sure when you put it back that you put it back over the igniter. That way the next time when you start the stove, it will start up properly. Does anybody have any comments or questions at this time right now before we go any further? Okay. We'll move forward here. So this area, we've removed the burn pot. So what we want to make sure here is we want to come in here with our vacuum and clean this area out. There'll be a lot of what they call fly ash in there. And we'll take that all out. We remove that. And this is the ash tray. This ash tray will be full. You should vacuum this out first. It doesn't hold a tremendous amount, but we want to vacuum that out, clean it. This area here will all be full of ash. We want to remove all that. So down in the bottom here, this little screw will be in here. I took this out already, but this little screw will be in here. You want to remove this screw, set it aside, and then remove this plate. This plate is covering the combustion fan, the combustion chamber area where the fly ash and things will happen, will fall into. And we'll get into a little bit more of that in a minute. So the way the smoke path works with this particular stove is you have your flame right here. The smoke and fly ash will actually come up and over these baffles, which we'll take out in a second, behind this baffle, down through some holes, and then eventually end up down through here, and the fan will be exiting it out of the house. So the next step we're going to go through here is to remove the baffles. So there's, in this particular model, the Saveva, the Sabrina, and the P963, there's 2 baffles in the firebox. In the smaller version, in the Mania, the Marcella, and 958, there's only 1 baffle in there. So to remove the baffles, there's 2 baffles here. The top one is simply just lift it up. There's little pins up and top, and then roll it out, and it just comes out. You'll vacuum this up, sweep it down with a little brush or something, clean it out, set it aside. And then also here, there's 2 little cam locks on each side of the firebox in here, left and right. All you do is you move those forward, so now this baffle is loose. So lift the baffle up. What I do is I slide my fingers in through the hole here, lift the baffle up, and then just slide it out. So one comment I'll make on the baffle is, this is obviously a new clean stove, hasn't been used, so it's not dirty. It's also hasn't had the heating and cooling like others will. So what we recommend is, if you can take just a little bit off, take a grinder and just slightly take an edge off here, just take the little burrs off, because eventually what happens is, between the box moving and this moving in the heating and cooling process, this could be a little bit challenging to get out. So the best thing to do is, once you get this out, just lightly touch each side, vacuum it off, set it aside, and you're all set. Any questions on taking the baffles out or removing that plate at this time? Okay, we'll move forward here. So we talked about the smoke path, and the part that most people forget about on a Piazzetta is these 2 little chambers here. There's a hole on each side. And the smoke path and the fly ash will actually travel down through those chambers down to this combustion area down here. Down in that combustion area is where you'll actually try to vacuum that out. But we recommend getting a brush that gets inside here and scrape this out, because this whole area here can potentially get plugged. And when that gets plugged, you'll have bad airflow, and again, you'll go with the lazy flame, the black glass, things like that. And that's the killer of a pellet stove, is air. We want to make sure we have the proper air coming into the stove at all times. So again, those slots are what most people miss on a Piazzetta. They always say they clean behind the baffle, they clean the baffle. It's really important that you clean in those holes also. So at this time, you've vacuumed this out, you've swept it out, you've made sure everything is good. You've vacuumed down in here, in this area here. There's also on this side, there's a little hole that's underneath in here, it'd be on the right side of the stove. The air tube for the pressure switch is actually hooked to that hole. It is important to make sure that that hole doesn't have anything plugged in it, like fly ash or anything like that stuck in it. You want to just kind of run your vacuum over it, make sure it's clear, because that could potentially cause some problems with lack of air or the pressure switch falling out and then the stove shutting down thinking there's a problem. So you want to make sure that little hole, and it's on the right hand side here. We have this slide off. If you come over here, you can actually see the tube and where it goes into. And while we're over on this side, you can see that this is your distribution blower. If you have pets and stuff, it's a good idea periodically through the whole heating season to make sure that's vacuumed out and make sure there's no cat or dog hair, stuck in there. And then there's a control board. So once you've vacuumed all that out, cleaned it out, recommend, cleaning the glass, making that all look good, it's time to reinstall the components back in. So again, we've ground the baffle plate and it's time to put it back in. Again, I like to slide my fingers up through there, kind of just angle it in. The one thing you want to make sure, which I think I just knocked over, is you want to make sure those cams are rolled backwards and not forwards when you put them in. If they're rolled this way, you'll never get it in. So you want to make sure they're rolled backwards. So you slide this in, go up to the wall, and then if you see there's little, we'll call them ears down here on the bottom, and they have to sit on the side there. And they just kind of lock the back panel in. What you'll do at this point is now just roll the cams back over into place. They don't have to be hard, just basically in place, keeping that back baffle from wiggling around. Then I take the top baffle, again this is on the bigger models, and you'll slide it, so up inside there's two little pins, one on each side. Here, I don't know if we can see that or not, but there's two little pins up there. So what you do with this one is you actually slide it up and over those pins. Easier said than done. And it just sits there, and then there's a little notch that the pins kind of sit into. And that's back in. So the baffle system now is back into place. Does anybody have any comments or questions on the baffle? Okay, so at this time we're going to put this plate back on. This plate comes with a flat gasket installed right now. Eventually, after taking this in and out a few times, this gasket won't be any good, you won't use it. And what Piazzetta recommends is to use the Seal Right from Martland, 800 degree. It stays pliable, so when you go to take this off again, it will take off, and it's not like silicone where you have to use a hammer and a screwdriver to get it off. So all you'll do is, after you vacuumed everything out, slide this back in. The little ears, you slide that over, put that back in place. Reinstall the screw. This is a metric Allen head for this. Some of the newer Piazzettas will actually have a little bit bigger screw, and they send another one with it. I also recommend putting a little never seize actually on these threads right here. That will help you the next time you need to get this screw out of the stove. I would then slide the ashtray back in. I would then also put the burn pot back in. Again, we cleaned this off. We make sure the hole is with the igniter in the back. Slide this in. And at that time, put the flame guide back on. Now this is a wearable part. This will burn out, just so everybody's aware. So if it burns out, it's not life or death. I mean, you can order a new one from your dealer, but I would recommend putting it back on, but this will burn out eventually. The newer ones that are coming are made of stainless steel. So at this time, we're gonna, we've cleaned the glass, we've swept everything, we've put everything back. We're gonna shut the stove up, and it's potentially ready to go. It's the beginning of the season right now. Things are gonna cool down. People are actually going to need their stoves very soon. So by doing this cleaning early on in the season and periodically through the year is going to be imperative to have your stove running properly. Part of the cleaning process is back here in the venting situation, and clearly this is not installed, so we don't have a vent hooked up, but please make sure all the venting is clean and properly vacuumed out. Make sure no birds made a nest in over the summer, or bees or anything like that. That's a common thing that happens early on in seasons, is a bird will get in the venting somehow or something like that and cause a problem. Is there anything else or any comments on the cleaning part of this before we move on to some of the troubleshooting and understand the codes that the stove will give us if there's problems? And yes, you could end up scratching the inside by removing the baffle, and especially when they're clean. But once there's ash on there, you won't see much of that. So we're going to come up here. So a lot of times people call me up and explain that that their stove went off, and there's a code coming up here that says stove status. Or I'm sorry, not stove status. Stove failure, flame failure or something. And so what will end up happening is the code is what I need to determine what's going on. And to show that code, what we need to do is go into the stove status feature of this. So what they'll do is, to get into the stove status, to give us the code of why maybe this stove shut off, is we're going to hit the far right hand button. This is how we get into all programming. And then you see the word select language come across. So most of you will have your manual ready and things like that, where it will explain there's a tree in here of all different things. So what I want to do by using these two buttons now is scroll through till I see the word stove status. So if I scroll through, I see it right there. So by hitting set, what that does is it tells me what's going on. So right now it's telling me the exhaust probe is reading 71 degrees. The smoke fan is actually at 0. Of course, it's not running, so it would be. This also gives me the auger, how fast that's turning. This would also, if there was a problem with the stove, would give me a code in here. Maybe ALF1, maybe ALF2, or no con. So there's a number of codes in there that it's going to say. So by doing that, I can tell you what might be wrong. So generally, most codes come up as ALF1, which, if you read the book, basically says the pressure switch opened for a combustion issue. And again, most of the combustion issues, the stove is dirty, whether the stove's dirty, whether the venting's dirty, a combination of that stuff. It just knows. Now, that could also be the hopper lid was left open too long while they were filling it. It could also be the doors open, things like that. It'll all give you that code, but this is where you find that code. And there's a number of them. They're in the owner's manual, but one of them you'll see is the word no con. And what that is, this little thermostat wire here is in the back of the stove. And this is important that it stays plugged in. What happens is we've seen a lot of things, even when they're plugged in, you see a lot of animals will chew on this, things like that. What will happen is, as you can see here, it says no con come up on the screen. And with that, with the no con, it's telling me that this probe is either damaged or unplugged, or the exhaust probe itself is damaged or unplugged. And that's down in the back of the stove, right on the exhaust. If this is damaged, just put a new one in and away you go. If it's not this, it doesn't look that, I would check that probe down there. So just a matter of plugging it back in, and eventually the code will clear and go out. And to get out of the programming side of things, as you can see the code changed now, to go back to the main screen, you always hit the on-off button. That will just bring you back to the main screen. One other feature I like to use this for, the stove status, is if I go to a house and someone says, my fan isn't running properly or something like that, you can actually go here and see what those fans are actually doing. You can actually see what the fans are doing. And it'll tell you whether they're spinning at the right RPMs. In the back of the tech manual, it will tell you what the RPMs are supposed to be depending on your power level of your stove. So this is a great way to say, okay, if it's supposed to be at 2,500 RPMs, then you would see 2,500 RPMs, or you might see 1,000 RPMs. So that's the other way to use that. Any questions on stove status, how to get into stove status, why it's a good tool, and you can actually help your customers over the phone with that to try to narrow down maybe what the problem might be? Okay, so one other thing I'm going to show you here that I like this feature too, and I recommend doing this at startup when you first install the stove. I would call this the cold test. And what this is I can run individual motors, fans, different things in here without even a fire in here or anything. And it helps me determine whether all the fans and motors are actually doing what they're supposed to. So again, to get into programming, we go into here. I got select language. I scroll through until I see the word menu parameters. And this all is in the tech bulletin, tech manual on how to do all this part of it. So you see menu parameters, you hit set. And here it says settings factory. I know that's the next step, so I would hit set. So now it's asking me for a code. The code access is in the manual, but for this particular one it's F5, so it's Frank 5. So these two first buttons scroll you either up or down. So if you start, you'll see P5 all the way down until you see F. And if I went too far, I can always go back the other way. I hit F5, I hit set. Now I'm in what they call test mode. So right now, if I hit this button right here, it's going to actually run the distribution fan. And you can actually hear the distribution fan come on. So that tells me that the distribution fan's running. There's no problems with the wiring, nothing stuck in it, things like that. To shut it off, I just hit the button and it's off. If I want another function, let's just say the auger motor, what you'll hear is the combustion motor start, and then the auger motor would start. And because I don't have pellets, you would actually hear pellets dropping in, but because we don't have pellets in here, you won't hear them. But I can see the auger turning. So, and to stop that function, you can do that. So again, you can do other function. I can test the igniter. I can test just the combustion blower. I can test everything if I want just by hitting set. So there's a number of things we can test. And I just think it's a great way to use this feature to make sure, especially when a customer calls you up and says their fan isn't working. You can get there real quick and just test the fan real quick. And if it runs, then you know it's another problem, not necessarily the fan's problem. Just a great little test. Any questions on how to do a cold test? Again, the diagram for that is all in the tech manual. If you need that, I'd be happy to get that to you. My email address is up here on the board. If you send me an email, I can get you the dealer tech manual for that. Well, if we have no other questions for today or comments, well, I really appreciate taking the time. This is the first Facebook Live training that we've done. I hope it's not our last. We're gonna keep doing these on different products. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I appreciate taking the time. This will be uploaded on our Facebook page, Northeast Distributions, and so you can replay this if you have customers, or I should say customers also, but also new employees that you want to show how to clean a pellet stove or a Piazzetta. It would be great for them to just go through that and know what to take apart. Again, thank you very much, and I appreciate you joining.